We are following breaking news out of Washington. Just moments ago, former Congressman Matt Gaetz announced in a post on X he is withdrawing himself from consideration to be President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Attorney General. NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley is following this breaking news for us. Ryan, Gaetz was just on Capitol Hill meeting with senators yesterday. Elon Musk and others were rallying, trying to get Republican senators behind this nomination. What is Gaetz saying today?
He's saying that he doesn't want to distract from the Trump-Vance team's goals and what they want to get done in the coming years. I think one of the important things to note here is that senators were very reluctant to sort of be the first to stick their neck out and say that he wasn't going to get through. But I think clearly we can surmise, based on his meetings, that this would have been a really uphill battle for him and perhaps wasn't even in the cards at all for him to get actually through confirmation here. It would have been an extraordinary set of circumstances, events. This has been a trickle that's been coming out. There's more information coming out, by the hour, by the day about this investigation. And, we had the New York Times story last night that showed a lot of these connections. We've had some incredible reporting at NBC News about some of the victims in this case. And it would have gotten extremely ugly. So now what we're not going to see is a target of a criminal investigation in recent Justice Department history take the reins of the Justice Department himself in the coming months.
A couple of questions here. Have we heard anything from President-elect Trump? This was his pick. And also, do we have a sense of who other contenders may be who might replace Gaetz in this position then?
Yeah, it's a great question. I haven't seen any reaction yet from Donald Trump, but I haven't looked at my phone in the past couple of minutes. I'm sure we'll see something from him soon if he hasn't already. But in terms of the next pick, I think actually the next person in line naturally would be the Deputy Attorney General nominee, which is Todd Blanche, who's the criminal defense lawyer for Donald Trump in his case in New York. And that's a pick that is sort of more, quote, normie within the normal realm here, because he's someone with a lot of history at the Justice Department. He's a former federal prosecutor. He did a lot of these violent crime cases. So he has certainly the experience, the resume, and the background that you would expect of someone who is going to be nominated to take over the Justice Department. But of course, there is that very close relationship he has with Donald Trump, and just the historical oddity of having a criminal defendant president put in place at the top of the Justice Department, his criminal defense attorney. So it certainly is a little bit strange, but I think certainly within the halls of the Justice Department right now, there's a huge sigh of relief for folks who are really worried about what that was going to look like with Matt Gaetz coming in as Attorney General. Yeah. Even if it does end up being Donald Trump's criminal defense attorney, I think that's going to be, for them, for people within the DOJ, that's going to be a lot better set of circumstances.
Todd Blanche, a normie, in your words, and maybe a not normie situation. We know Gaetz resigned from his post in Congress, presumably so he could become the Attorney General after being chosen. So what does this mean for him? He can't rejoin Congress, right?
Right. And the timing here is so critical because actually, overall, I think this was actually Matt Gaetz's best path, because if he had stayed in Congress, that report, that incredibly damning report from what we've heard, was going to come out. And so instead, he gets nominated to be the Attorney General of the United States. Oops, no longer, you can't get that report out anymore. This trickle. And now, I expect he already has a podcast, right? You can sort of read the tea leaves and see where this is going to go. I suspect he'll be in sort of a more Steve Bannon-like position. He'll probably continue with that podcast, be a bombastic person sort of on the outside supporting Donald Trump and, claiming he was a victim of the deep state or what have you. It's sort of a predictable path I think we can see Matt Gaetz going to, because he's already sort of been that figure on his own. Even when he was in Congress, he's been this very, out there, forward person who's really just, big on media, was partnered closely with Marjorie Taylor Greene and, sort of an influencer within Congress, kind of. So I suspect we know where that is going to end, but, only time will tell. But I strongly suspect we're going to see him be hosting a podcast or, have some sort of role in the MAGA universe.
So, Ryan, Matt Gaetz has taken himself out of the running for this Attorney General position. We have yet to hear from the President-elect. Presumably, this is a decision that he would have given his blessing to. Bring us up to speed on where the other nominations stand, and have we gotten any new names for any new positions today? Because it's been coming pretty fast and furious.
It has. And, I've been mostly focused on the Gaetz thing, full disclosure. So that's, the Justice Department is where my realm is. But there's certainly been, a lot of these nominees that are continuing to trickle in. I think, obviously, the big question now is who is going to be that next Attorney General pick. Todd Blanche is, because right now he's the Deputy Attorney General nominee on paper. Does he end up being the Attorney General nominee? What happens next?
As far as you know, Blanche there are no investigations against Blanche. There are not any obvious skeletons in the closet.
No, and he has a good reputation. I think, within SDNY, within the Southern District of New York, within the Justice Department community at large, obviously is pretty hard charging during when he was defending Donald Trump. But, this is someone who I think, was in the position at a big law firm and then decided to step out on his own and, align himself with Donald Trump. But it still is someone who I think was brought up in that institutional knowledge. And certainly, I think the way that when I've been talking to folks within DOJ about this, it's like he has a line, right? And that's the sort of the more important thing, whereas that wasn't the belief about Matt Gaetz.
Vaughn, I'll start with you. I know we have new reporting on how this decision by Gaetz was reached. What's the latest?
Right. Multiple sources tell our colleagues here at NBC News that it was Matt Gaetz' decision to ultimately step aside and not continue to seek the nomination of Attorney General. This comes after he visited Capitol Hill, and ultimately it was going to come down to whether there was going to be a majority of senators who would vote to confirm him. And Matt Gaetz, 8 days after being nominated by the president-elect to serve as the top prosecutor at the Department of Justice, is taking his name out of the running. And the president-elect, Donald Trump, he put on a social media post that he appreciated that Matt Gaetz was willing to step aside so as not to be a distraction from the work of this transition. Of course, they have an entire cabinet and administration to fill and more than 4,000 political appointees, but so much of the attention had squared up right on Matt Gaetz, not only around the deeply serious allegations that were coming from Capitol Hill, that he had sex with a minor, but also the fact that he was a bombastic figure who had many, even Republicans, had concerns would use the office of the Department of Justice to go and seek political persecutions and indictments. And now the question is, who does Donald Trump turn to with Matt Gaetz out of the fray?
Yeah, this not only got a lot of attention, it took up a lot of time. Julie, Gaetz, we know, met with Republican senators yesterday. You have new reporting about what could have been behind this decision today.
Yeah, exactly. It's a combination, Kate and Zinkley, of just the votes not being there. You heard Vaughn talking about the majority that is needed. Senators could only afford to lose 3 Republicans if Vice President-elect Vance were to break that tie. And they had far more than that. At least 5 Senate Republicans. We have them by name. That includes Mitch McConnell, the outgoing Republican leader, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Mark Wayne Mullen, and brand new Senator-elect John Curtis of Utah, who Gaetz actually worked to promote his primary opponent. And certainly there's some bad blood there from his time in the House, who were just flat out immovable no's. When you combine that with all of these allegations that are continuing to come out, drips of leaks that we are continuously hearing, Gaetz's meetings with members of the Senate Judiciary Committee were consumed by that rather than a vision of what he was going to do to transform the Department of Justice. And both of those things combined ultimately doomed him.
And Julie, one of the things that's happened, too, is that we're getting new details about that House Ethics Committee investigation into Matt Gaetz and his alleged misconduct. And we're learning some more details. What do we know at this point?
Yeah, our Sarah Fitzpatrick, in contact with an attorney for 2 of the alleged victims that testified before the committee, we are learning that Gaetz had a sexual encounter allegedly with 1 minor, but both 2 times in one night, allegedly, according to what we're hearing from the lawyers here. And this is just continuous revelations of the multi-year-long investigation that the House Ethics Committee, a bipartisan panel, has held after the Department of Justice decided not to charge Gaetz, but never cleared him, to be clear of potential wrongdoing, of potential sex trafficking. And these are exactly the concerns that senators are talking about when they say that there is potentially more information that could come to light that maybe even President-elect Trump wasn't aware of.
So, Vaughn, do we have any sense of what the reaction has been like inside the Department of Justice, which he could have overseen?
Right. There were concerns among career prosecutors who have long worked at the Department of Justice about Matt Gaetz' promises to root out what he called the deep state inside of the Department of Justice, including firing prosecutors who, they make the case, do not have Donald Trump's agenda in mind. And our colleagues Ryan Riley and Ken Delanian are now reporting that some of these unnamed prosecutors currently in the DOJ are breathing sighs of relief that Matt Gaetz is not going to be the next attorney general. One saying, quote, "Such a relief, hard to imagine him appointing someone worse, but we will see." That opens, of course, the question of who does come next. He has suggested he's going to nominate his personal attorney, Todd Blanche, to be the number 2, the deputy attorney general. Could he be instead nominated for attorney general? Or are there a list of others that could fill that vacancy now left by Matt Gaetz? It's a sight to be seen.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.